Joining me now is someone who knows Donald Trump better than most people, his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Michael is the host of the very important Mea Culpa podcast. It's really interesting. I've had a chance to be on it a few times. He's the author of Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the Department of Justice Against His Critics, and Disloyal, a memoir, the true story of the former personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump. There's a lot in there, my friend. Thanks for coming in person, by the way.
Good to see you. Thanks for bothering me on a Sunday.
There's a lot to unpack, including do you believe he's going to declare that he's going to run for president on Tuesday? You've generally not thought that's going to happen. And there are people around him who seem to be advising him, both in public and privately, to not do this. Right. He says he's going to do it.
Now, that would include both his daughter and his son-in-law, as well as a host of other people. I've always maintained...
Because running has not been good for Jared and Ivanka.
Well, it wouldn't be good for them. It's been actually excellent for them. I mean,
yes.
He pulled down $600 million, $2.5 billion from the Saudis.
Right.
They've done very well from their time in the White House. One of the things also, and I've maintained even on your show, that I believe that Jared is the mole. And I would find it very interesting if, in fact, Donald somehow managed to get back into the White House. Could you imagine if you have an FBI informant as a senior advisor to the president? So there are many reasons.
What makes you think that?
Well, because there's just too much information that's out there right now that only somebody within this circle of trust would actually know. For example, where these top secret documents are. But they're not even the important part anymore. The important thing that I've talked to you about this a lot. Donald's not going to run. There is no benefit. And I listen to these pundits talk about how if he declares his candidacy, then all of these legal issues go away. They do not. Just because you announce that you want to run for the president doesn't turn around and it doesn't stop Tish James's case in the Attorney General here in New York. It doesn't stop the district attorney's case here in New York, the Georgia case that's coming up, or any other multitude of cases that are now currently pending against Donald. There's no effect on. Could you imagine if every single person who's committed a crime turned and said, you know what, I've decided I'm going to run for the presidency, so this is all going to be stayed. That's not how it works. On top of that, and more importantly, Donald is a fragile ego. So there's not a diaper big enough for him to actually be called a loser again. And statistically, you just posted on your show, statistically, he is more unfavorable than Joe Biden is to the country, which nobody thought was even possible. Nobody thought it was possible that they were going to keep the Senate. And who knows, they couldn't even possibly hold the House, which I don't think. But he's so wildly unpopular, not just in his own party, but nationally, that there's absolutely no way in the world, no way that he's going to end up running. Now, and by the way, can I say one more thing? So now that George is really off the table because they have the 50 number, what do you think? Why does he have to wait till Tuesday? He's always said, oh, maybe I'm going to wait till after Georgia. That's December 6th. That's not Tuesday. He's already trying to push that down the road. Well, Georgia's not relevant anymore. Right? It's relevant because we want to win it, but it's not relevant in the scheme of things. Announce tomorrow. Let's see, big man. Announce tomorrow.
Right. Let's talk about the Republican Party, which remains in thrall. You were a senior official in the Republican Party. The Republican Party...
As a Democrat. People forget that. Okay. I've always been a Democrat. I get a lot of ribbing on social media. Oh, you only became a Democrat after Donald threw you under the bus. It's not true. I've been a Democrat since the 80s.
But you held office in the Republican Party. It's very senior office.
It's an interesting... Listen, this world is interesting.
I guess so. All right. But the point I'm getting at is that the Republican Party officially supports Donald Trump. They will not support somebody running against him. They will eliminate, like they did last time when Joe Walsh and Bill Weld and all these other people ran. They just eliminated the primaries. They will not allow a candidate to run against Donald Trump if Donald Trump wants to run. So Ron DeSanctimonious, as he likes to call him, is in some polls running against Donald Trump. What do you think of what Joe Walsh said there? That it doesn't matter if there's Trump and then there's Trumpism, and Ron DeSantis, who's not his friend right now, does support a lot of the same things.
Yeah, I think the Republican Party has now come to the realization that Donald is not good for the party. And I don't agree with Joe on that. I believe that Ron DeSantis, if in fact he announced, the Republican Party would do actually what they did when Donald first announced his candidacy in 2015. They're going to take a step back. And they're going to turn around and say, you know what, let's let the process play out and see who Republicans want. Now, me personally, I'm not a fan of Ron DeSanctimonious either. I think he's Donald Trump 2.0. So are we actually doing better for this country? By having someone like Ron DeSantis, I'd rather see someone like Joe Walsh.
Who's honest about who he is.
Yes.
He comes by his conservative principles and has stuck by them. What about all this stuff about the Wall Street Journal, about News Corp, about Fox, about Murdoch, about the New York Post, all of these institutions that Donald Trump depended on, also Twitter, who knows whether he'll get back on Twitter or not. Truth Social has not got the same sway that Twitter has had. Donald Trump is losing some of the...
There's 8 people on it. How could they?
Donald Trump's losing the institutional support that he's got. But as I was talking to Mary Trump about earlier, that stuff doesn't make him back off and reconsider. It seems to make him want it more.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure I agree with Mary on that point. I agree with a lot of the things that she said. I'm not sure that I agree. Remember what we did during the campaign. Remember what Donald did when he went ahead and attacked Ted Cruz. He put the photo, National Enquirer, of Ted Cruz's father with Lee Harvey Oswald in the caption, Ted Cruz's father killed JFK. And then they did it to Marco Rubio by putting him in a swimming pool naked with a bunch of guys claiming it was a cocaine binge. He then also was able to use the friendship, the power, the relationship with Fox News Corp to continue to promote these lies, this misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. He no longer has that. He's really isolated to himself and his Untruth Social, again, which has 8 people in it. Nobody cares. By the way, you're probably one of the 8 people because I'm not on it. I don't see what Untruth Social has to say. I don't care what he has to say. In fact, Republican Party doesn't care what Donald has to say anymore. Yes, he has his millions of people, his 18% of the Republican Party, and waning. Give it the 2 years. He's going to become more and more inconsequential, more and more irrelevant, which will drive him crazy. So he will say more bombastic stuff along with Don Jr. and Eric as they start screaming and yelling about how their dad was unjustly treated and so on. It doesn't matter. The case is going to finish. He's going to end up being, probably, in my opinion, indicted, incarcerated. We don't know. I leave up to the jury. But things are not going well for Donald. It would not make sense for him to join in this 2024 race.
Well, you have been consistent in your approach to this, so we're going to watch it very closely. Thanks for coming in, my friend. Good to see you.
Always good to see you, Mike.
All right, we'll talk to you soon again. Michael Cohen is Donald Trump's former personal fixer and attorney. He's the host of the Mea Culpa podcast. His latest book is called Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the Department of Justice Against His Critic. His earlier book is Disloyal.